Welcome everyone. Hello. Welcome to today's session. Welcome. You are join us for this Editage webinar on journal metrics. My name is Duncan Nicholas. I shall be your host and speaker for the session today. I'm going to share my screen for the slides for today's webinar, and we shall proceed with today's event. So my name is Duncan Nicholas. I am the director of DN Journal Publishing Services, a consultancy delivering editorial development, journal development, and training for researchers, publishers, society journals, independent journals all over the world. My background in publishing is with I worked for Taylor and Francis for around 12 years. And I'm also the president of the European Association of Science Editors. I'm also a member of COPE, Committee of Publication Ethics, one of the few individual members of COPE, actually, instead of usually their journals or publishers who are members. So I've been involved in various aspects of journal publishing for almost 20 years. A lot of which involves working with metrics, understanding metrics from publisher's perspective, from a researcher's perspective, and an independent consultant working with many different communities to help understand things that are going on with journals within research areas, to help researchers understand who they are, what they're working on, and journals to develop. So with that background in mind, I shall be taking you through a lot of practical tips and insights into metrics through today's session. So this session is an Editage event. Editage is a division of Cactus Communications, which was established with the aim of bridging the gap between authors and peer-reviewed journals to accelerate the process of publishing high-quality research. We are armed with one of the largest teams of over 2,500 editors, trainers, publication support experts in the world, of which I am very proud to be one of that number. For nearly 2 decades, we have provided high quality services to our partners in the academic, publishing and pharmaceutical communities. I very much hope that you will get a lot of vital, useful information from today's session. So what we will cover today are I have some questions for you coming up, a little bit of interactivity to get us started with your ideas on what can metrics do for us, what you want to understand from journal metrics, and then I'll go through some of the common citation metrics that we might all be familiar with, but maybe don't understand quite so well. So we'll have a look into those and dig into actually some kind of practical use of what we can learn from them. And then we'll look at alternative metrics, which are, as the name suggests, a more progressive alternative to the traditional citation metrics. So I'll introduce those to you if you're not familiar with platforms like Plum Analytics or Altmetrics. And then some insights into how we will measure, monitor and influence presence of our work and what we can do with those metrics. And finally, some issues to consider in how we interpret or apply all of these pieces of data. So I'll ask you lots of questions today, give you room to respond, to add your thoughts. So please feel free to use the chat panel and interface as much as possible. See, many of you are familiarizing yourselves with it. Hello to everyone: Pakistan, Philippines, Sweden, hi Sweden, Angola, Sudan, Egypt. Fantastic global audience today. So keep using that chat and keep using the Q&A for any questions that you have and to interact with all of the kind of activities on questions that I'll be putting your way over the course of the session. I'll do some live demonstrations using these platforms. So if you would like me to look up something for you as an example during those sessions, I can do that for you. It's always good. I mean, I have some things in mind that I'm going to use, but if anyone has any kind of better, interesting suggestions that I could look up, then I will happily use those. So feel free to suggest those. And if you have access to those platforms like Web of Science, Dimensions, and Altmetrics, you can follow along with some of the tasks and test out the things yourself in those platforms while we're talking. So let's start with some chat. What do you want to get from metrics? What can they do for us? What is it that you are hoping to get out from today's session, really? So for example, for me, when I first started really trying to interrogate Web of Science, for example, to understand what is an impact, what are the actual articles that contribute to this impact factor as a researcher. What can I actually do with this number? I know that I might need it for my assessment and for my career, but what does it mean beyond that? How can I use it? Does anyone have any kind of ideas about specific things they want to get from today's session? Mention it in the chat. Drop it in the chat. See, we have a range of kind of subject areas of everyone in the chat. Forestry research, radiation, cytogenetics, cultural studies. So that'll make it quite interesting for examples. Mark Ritchie, thank you. To benchmark to determine research usability. Usability is an interesting word. Look at some concepts of that, like a citation tells us the research has been used in one way. How do we know what way that it has been used? Those kind of aspects. So there's a few ideas there to get us started on today's session. So here's some ideas that I have as to some of the most prominent and important features of what metrics can do for us and how we can use them. So they can demonstrate, we can analyze them, and they can show us an analysis of some activities. We can use them to compare things, benchmark, identify and understand. So citations can demonstrate the effectiveness of our publication. If someone has cited us, we are having some kind of impact, some kind of influence in the world, and hopefully that's a good thing. We can use metrics to analyze our competitors and our peers and look for strengths and weaknesses. As an individual researcher, we can see who we compare to. How are other people in our subject area, in our field? How is their work being performed? Who is reading their work? Which institutions are people working at that are citing that work? We can use it for benchmarking, contextualizing our performance or our journal's performance, the impact and presence. So if a journal acquires 10 citations in a year, that's its kind of benchmark for this year. What will its goal be next year? And we can identify the trends in subject areas. So if we've received if a journal has received 10 citations, is it realistic to hope that it will receive 20 or 100? What's the other journals in that subject area? are any of them receiving 100 citations? So if they're not, then it's probably not realistic for us to want to aim for that many citations. Those kind of benchmarking and analysis, identifying those kind of performance sort of benchmarks, indicators, and metrics. And last, to understand all of these in relation to each other, as that I hope that example kind of demonstrates. So let's start taking a look at examples of these metrics, starting with the most commonly referred to and pursued, the impact factor. So here are some kind of metrics that you may be familiar with. Within the Web of Science, which creates the impact factor, they also show 5-year impact factor and an immediacy index to show how quickly citations are accrued, eigenfactor score and article influence score, variations on the theme. Scopus have a site score, which is very similar to the impact factor, and the Scopus SJR journal rank, which is more complex. We'll have a look at those in detail shortly. The source normalized impact per paper, or SNP, that's relative to the SJR. And then we have the H index. So these ones are all, the first lot are journal level metrics, really, assessing citation activity on a journal scale or on individual articles. The H index is more commonly used for individual researchers, and the G index is a variation on the H index for individual citation activity. So there are a lot. And well, there's even more actually than I put in those examples. So the Web of Science impact factor, this is the most highly competitive database for that we have for journals, and the metric that is produced from this database is the impact factor, which in turn makes it the most kind of competitive metric of all of the ones we'll speak about today. It has reasonably strict inclusion criteria for journals, in a way to enhance that competitive aspect of it. And it's a privately owned company. It currently indexes around 35,000 index titles, which is only a reasonably small proportion of all of the journals that there are in the world, although it covers pretty much every discipline within its hierarchy of categories. It currently has 2.7 million article reviews and other source items in the database, and 145 million cited references. So that's a huge network of activity that we can use to find out some useful information about our work. And then it's broken down into different subject-specific databases and core databases, as well as regional ones and language-centric databases. So they've recently launched the Egyptian and Arabic database. There's a Russian database as well, for example. So there are several interfaces, nested interfaces within the Web of Science. Maybe many of you are familiar with these. We'll have a dig around in these, have a look at these shortly. So this impact factor is the key, the flagship metric of the Web of Science. It's located in the Insights Journal Citation Report. So in fact, just using the Web of Science, you will not see the impact factor. It's kept in a different database, which again requires a different subscription to access. The impact factor is, the calculation for it is the number of citations received within the impact factor year to items published in the 2 preceding years. So, for example, the 2021 impact factor measures citations to citations published in that year to source items published in 2020 and 2019. This year, the impact factor changed, in fact, to incorporate source items with the date referring to the date that it was published online, not the date of the issue that it was published in. And that's one reason why a lot of impact factors have increased a lot this year. And next year, the impact factor, well, I'll move to my next slide with some examples. So traditionally, the impact factor has been reported to 3 decimal places. Next year, it's only going to be reported to 1 decimal place to minimize a little bit of the excess competitiveness and kind of hyper focus on this metric. Maybe some of you that are familiar with impact factors of journals that you might frequently publish in might be relatively astonished by the size of some of these numbers. These are huge numbers. But what do they really mean? I mean, we can only really appreciate them in the context of other journals in the category and by kind of digging in to these journals. Over the last few years, well, commonly, lots of these top journals are used to be a mix of all different kind of subjects. But in the last couple of years, COVID-19 research has inflated impact factors so much that the only non-medical journals in the kind of list of all of the highest impact factors appear 19th and 28th in the rankings of all journals. All the others are all medical journals now in different kind of medical public health kind of fields. And in fact, this the Cancer Journal for clinicians usually has an impact factor of around 100. This year, it's 286. Last year, it was actually over 500. And that is all because of COVID research being used so kind of rapidly. So digging in to the impact factor and to the metrics and what they show, we can go over to the Web of Science and have a look at some examples. So this is the citation distribution chart from the Cancer Journal, and this is the distribution of citations of articles that make up that impact factor. Of course, many journals don't really look like this. This is one that is being exceptionally well cited, but it can show you the range, number of citations of that articles are picking up. So a lot of articles have 1 citation, and 2, 3, 4. A very large number of articles have a very large number of citations as well. This is not a particularly common example of citation distribution, but here we can go to we can look at, where is my citation reports? Let me see for some examples. Some post-colonial studies, chemistry. Okay, I'll look for a journal in chemistry. Let's look at Let's look at chemistry letters as an example. So we can see the journal performance. So a slight increase last year and a big increase this year. This increase in impact factors this year has been typical in most journals because of the change in the calculation of moving all of the citation date from the issue that it's published to the year of that it was published online. So any journals that have been accumulating any articles in their backlog over the last year that would be published like kind of next year or in the future are all counted all together now. So this year has had a big bump in citation in impact factors. And here at the side shows you the biggest articles that are contributing to that impact factor. So these are not the total citation counts of the articles, but they are within the impact factor window. So here the highest cited ones, 22, 18 citations, and so on. Here's the total number of citations the journal has accumulated over its whole existence. And here is the citation distribution. Compare that to the previous one of the cancer journal that we just looked at. I would say this is far more typical of any journal. Those ones at the top of the rankings are very unusual. So here we see most of the articles receive few citations, although it's quite a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4. And here at the side, the average number of citations for regular articles is 1. The average number of citations for review articles is 4. Again, that is a typical trend that we see through all journals. Review articles tend to be cited more often than regular articles. And here, this long tail of a few small numbers of articles receiving high numbers of citations. And then we break it down even further, look at the contributions of open access articles and subscription articles. This can be very useful for journals that are debating whether to convert to full open access or just analyze the effectiveness of open access in different fields. And here's the rank of this journal in the different subject areas that it's indexed in. Chemistry, multidisciplinary here. Even more to dig around in. So you can get very lost in here with all those different additional metrics. Contributions by country and region here can be extremely useful. So that is an example of some ways that we can dig into the impact factor to get a better understanding of what it is that it's actually showing us. So moving to Scopus, the other large database of journals with around 25,000 indexed journal titles covering 300 disciplines. So very, very similar to the Web of Science. Now, the difference between Scopus and Web of Science is that all 25,000 of these titles receive the database metric, that SJR and the site score, whereas the Web of Science has more journals indexed in it, but only a small number of them actually receive an impact factor. So from that 45,000 journals index, only 12,000 of them are in the core collection that receive impact factors. Now, something I forgot to mention earlier, that is going to change again next year when all journals in the early citation, I forget the actual name, the ESCI database, Emerging Sources Citation Index, that all journals in there are now going to be given an impact factor. which I think is good news. I think it again as a move to sort of diminish the excessive aggressive competitiveness about the impact factor, and because it was very difficult for some of those journals to ever get out of that database. So it was an idea that, well, I think this is the natural conclusion of giving them all impact factors. So anyway, Scopus, it's again extremely large database. It's also more accessible than the Web of Science. And it shows it has lots of visualizations in it. You can dig in to each journal through the metric interface and see the relationships of lots of different factors to understand a lot more. The calculation of the site score is similar to the impact factor, except it is over the 3 preceding years rather than 2 compared to the impact factor. So it's a slightly larger window of activity that it's reporting on. And the top site scores from the Scopus database here, the same cancer journal for clinicians as in the first place, with 716 citations. A few years ago, the site score for that journal was just 130. So that is the huge effect that COVID research is having on this current set of metrics. So the last couple of years are probably going to see a big peak of journal impact factors. So subsequent years, we will see how the metrics change and what the numbers come down to, I think. Also from Scopus is the SCImago Journal and Country Rank score, the SJR. Now, the calculation for this is based on the transfer of prestige from one journal to the other and the interaction of the rankings of different journals and where the citations come from. So a citation to a paper from the top cited journal is worth more than a citation from a lower ranked journal to that same paper. Whether that is a kind of an optimal way of measuring citations or not is debatable, because it could constantly skew citations in favor of higher ranked journals. But in a way, it's another way of looking at the activity. So this is a somewhat more complex metric. Google Scholar, moving on, completely different style of metric. Google Scholar is intended to show us the impact of individuals. So far we've been looking at article level citations adding up to journal level metrics, whereas this is a metric. The H index is a metric for individual researchers to measure their kind of impact in their field, not even just in their field, wherever their papers are being cited. And it uses the citations from Google Scholar. Google Scholar is incredibly effective search engine database for research, but it brings in more than just journal articles and academic material. It searches metadata. It's pretty easy to get journals indexed in Google Scholar. You just have to have the metadata in the right place, which is incredibly useful for helping discoverability of research in independent journals that don't have so much financial support to maybe get to the levels that are required to be indexed in Scopus or the Web of Science. So in a way, it's more of a equitable database. So it tends to have more citations, and also it gives you access to more versions of the articles than the other two platforms. The publisher's full text, if it's indexed, tends to be the primary version of the article that is shown here in the top link of Google Scholar. But if you can see here, this link here says all 9 versions, all 3 versions of each of the articles. If you click those, then it will show you all of the different versions, including any that are archived by researchers on any repositories. So there's free text versions there. So that helps facilitate more kind of open access to lots of research. And there's another good reason why researchers should self-archive their work, because Google Scholar will pick it up. It will include it with the main publisher's version, but also give people access. So anyone that's not subscribed to journals will still be able to access your work. So the H index here, it's this from David Moher, who is a journalologist. He's a health researcher, but also writes a lot of research on journalology, the activity of journals, and bibliometric research like we are talking about now. So he has an H index of 125, which is pretty huge. I think I'll be lucky if mine is over 1 or 2. And the H index counts the largest number of articles with the largest number of citations. So for this H index here, there are 125 articles with 125 citations. So there could be articles with many more citations. So you could have an article with 1,000 citations, but only 1, so it doesn't count. This is where the kind of the numbers meet, and that's the H index. So again, it's relatively crude, but relatively effective at just showing a cutoff point, a kind of metric of activity. So what do these citations tell us? What can we use them for? Who is reusing our work? What our influence in the field is? The value of our work, perhaps, or the work that we're reading, and the quality of the work. I guess quality is the one that is most debatable and controversial, as we will see. Okay, so I'm going to do some more little demonstration. Go back to the Web of Science again, and I'm going to show you. I'm going to have a look to see what else we can use the Web of Science for digging into for those things. Who's reusing it? What kind of influence are we having in the field? So I'm going to use. I'm going to use. So we have a forestry researcher in the chat. So I'm going to look at forestry and publication years. Let's have, I don't know, 2015 to this year and see. So this was a topic search for forestry published in the last 7 years. So reasonably recent activity. Here we can see lots of quick filters. I'm going to zoom in. Here we have quick filters, highly cited papers and hot papers. So hot papers this is a little emblem given to articles that have received higher than average, or even higher than average, actually, like in the top quartile of citations for papers in the journal within the last 2 months. So this is very much a rolling little icon. So if we were to look at this again in a few months' time, these 4 papers would be different. So if I click on that and refine it, we can see what are these hot papers in this field of forestry. You can see here an R package. Okay, methods papers get cited quite a lot. It's one of the reasons why David Moher, in my last example, has such a high H index, because he's written some methods papers that get referenced a lot. A review paper here, again, review articles get cited quite a lot, but we can see here what people are using in the last couple of months, what they're accessing very quickly. We can see who the authors are on these articles. Another review article here. We can see the kind of overlapping categories within that forestry research topic search that I used. So I'll go back again and see. So from 18,000 results in this, we can see 8,700 are open access. 347 have associated kind of open data sets with them. So maybe if we're looking to analyze some existing data sets rather than collecting our own, we can look at these papers and see what they are about. We can see who the authors are, in fact, and we can get their email address so we can get in touch with them and say, I'm working on this thing I would like to have access to your data. And that is how you can start professional relationships, networking with other researchers in your field from different contexts. Maybe you're creating your own data set and you would like to compare yours to theirs. Maybe you've studied exactly the same thing in a different kind of so this is high boreal forest multifunctionality. Maybe you want to compare a different kind of biome using the same methods and compare their data set to yours. So that's one way of finding that kind of information. And of course, we have all these researchers here who's most active in forestry at the moment. Again, all of these overlapping kind of topics. So, if you're looking for a gap in research to study, we've got forestry and criminology, penology. So let's have a look in there, see what's going on around there. Counteracting crimes in the sphere of forest resources use could be interesting. This kind of thing can help you identify gaps in knowledge that would be very difficult to achieve by reading all of the literature in your field. So that's kind of some very quick sort of ideas of how you can use this database. Stop sharing that. Go back. So back to citations themselves rather than the networks. What do citations tell us? This is the citation activity of an article. It's received 1,763 citations over 25 years. What are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts? Sounds great. Can anyone tell me what paper they think this is? Published in 98. Sort of a couple of years to really build a lot of citations. Then it's kind of took off and stayed very active ever since. This is the title. I can't really say many of those words very quickly. Developmental disorders in children. Do you recognize it from the title? This is the extremely famous Andrew Wakefield paper, which fraudulently linked vaccines to autism, demonized the MMR vaccine jab, and is one of the main influences behind the anti-vax movement, which has caused all sorts of ongoing problems in various different aspects of kind of life since it was published. Yet this article has a, it's still acquiring a lot of citations. So without this kind of context, despite being retracted, so it was retracted here in 2010 as well, and it's still gone on to receive a lot of citations. Does this mean it is a good paper because it has a lot of citations? Are the citations to this paper also good and in the spirit of progress, developing research in a good faith sense? We always need context, so it's good to be able to dig into all of this information. Could be hard to look through 1,763 citations. But citations are not the only way of understanding research, and that is why alternative metrics were developed. Excuse me. Alternative metrics, as the name suggests, are an alternative to the impact factor. They measure the quantity of attention and also give an insight into the qualities of that attention as well. And they are a measure of the presence of articles on the internet or around the world. And I guess they're characterized by being very colorful as well, as you can see here. These are Plum Analytics, Altmetric, Donut, and Dimensions, sort of rhombozoid. I don't know the word for the three-dimensional thing that is. So they all measure internet-based activity using DOIs to track articles where they're referenced, where they appear, or triangulating author names, title, journal name, a lot of text from the article to if it's mentioned in media sources. So again, this is another reason why we have to train our journalists to cite articles, to cite research properly, so that it can be captured on these kind of platforms, so we can understand more than just usage from publishers' sites, more than just citations, which are both included in Plum Analytics. This also captures when it's been bookmarked in kind of bibliographic tools such as Mendeley, Zotero, mentions on blogs, comments, when articles are added to Wikipedia or referenced in Wikipedia, in news media, post publication open reviews, and also the blue one, social media, when they're mentioned on Reddit, shared in tweets, added to Facebook posts, maybe LinkedIn as well, I'd hope. I think Plum might measure LinkedIn. I'm not sure that Altmetric does yet. So Plum Analytics is owned by Elsevier, and all Elsevier journals have this little Plum widget on them that you can access and have a look at the activities on all of these, on each of the articles. So in contrast to the Scopus and Web of Science metrics that we were looking at, which are journal based, alt metrics are intended to be article based, article level metrics, to only give us insights into individual articles. Of course, we can, and I do, as part of a lot of development work, download whole journals worth of individual articles to have a look at the whole activity on a journal level. But the main purpose of them is to show researchers who is using their work and how it's being used. And this is the breakdown of altmetric colors as well. And you can see the proportions of these kind of usages in the different colors, and the score. And the score is sort of arbitrary as well. Think, like, for example, a tweet is worth half a point, whereas a policy document may be worth 10 points, 50 points. I'm not sure, but altmetric does tell you very much that as an example. If this article has been used to inform national policy, then it will show up on altmetric, as well as just people talking and sharing it on social media. It can show you real world impacts and effects that research is having, as well as the discussion around it and how it's being used in the news media as well. So here's an example of a big paper a few years ago when some researchers reported gravitational waves from a black hole. So this is a big, popular, interesting paper that was reported on 153 news outlets, 71 blogs, nearly 4,000 tweets about it. So I'm going to show you again, dig around into where is it? Oh, I need to open the link in the right place. Bear with me while I wrestle with too many screens, trying to keep it all in the same window. Okay, so here we don't just get lots of pretty colors or a list. We get all of these panels where we can look at which news articles are talking about this work. And then we can click through to that news article and see what they're saying about it. We can see which blogs are talking about us, which Twitter accounts and people are talking about this work. And we can also see the information about these people. So let me zoom in a bit again, maybe not that far. So this person, Vince Buffalo, we can see that he has 11,000 followers. So if we as researchers are looking to make contacts, enhance our network of people that might be interested in our work, or that we'd like to make connections with, whose work we'd like to read, and just generally increase our kind of social researcher profile, altmetrics give you, everything that you need to really build up that kind of profile very quickly. I mean, that's a whole other webinar, a whole other session in itself, talking about enhancing your researcher profile. So here we can see Vince has 11,308 followers. We can also click through to his Twitter account directly, see who he is, and follow him directly, see other work that he's been doing recently, and just generally find and expand our network that way. And same, we can look at Poblon's reviews there, Facebook page posts, Wikipedia, etc. So we can see all of that kind of activity there. And if I go back to the summary, we can also, this doesn't work on Zoom. I'm hoping it's going to work in this platform. Oh, no, it's the wrong. Where is it? Okay, forget that. It doesn't work in this platform either. But you can you can download from the Altmetrics site. You can download a widget to plug in to your browser that lets you any article with the DOI. You can click on the little Altmetric widget, and it will show you the Altmetric information that has been captured on that article without having to go to the Altmetric platform. So that is on the Altmetric website, and it's extremely useful. I use it all the time, constantly. I'm gonna just pop that in the chat for you there. Okay, so this slide that's up here is some research into the effect of social media on citations and the effects on academic usage and the academic impacts of sharing articles on social media and Altmetrics, and whether a high Altmetrics score will give us an insight into citations, because a lot of people are skeptical of setting up social media profiles, wondering what is the purpose of it, and it's often seen as quite trivial, the use of social media. But I mean, as you saw from that example of that researcher, Vince Buffalo, he has nearly 12,000 followers, which is no small amount. So I think the kind of perception of the uses of social media for academics is definitely changing, although it's still in quite a small proportion of people that use it. A lot of those people are often influential in their fields, quite high profile, and they have a voice of a reasonable amount of influence. So, and they will likely speak to people who speak to other people who are offline. So messages that are shared, papers that are shared, discussions that are had online have ripples that affect offline activity as well. And that's what these kind of papers are showing and trying to get at. And there is an increasing amount of research that say that articles that receive higher online attention tend to be cited more. Although, well, several years ago, actually now, the effect was weaker for articles in high impact journals, which tended to be cited quite highly anyway, which makes sense, because if the papers weren't going to be cited highly, those journals wouldn't have high impact factors. So people are looking at those journals anyway. But if you are a new up and coming researcher, you want to get your paper and voice heard, you want to network with researchers and get involved in the active community, digging through Altmetrics, seeing who is active on those platforms is definitely an incredibly effective way to go. And as we're kind of coming up to the hour of the session, of Dimensions, just to show you Dimensions, is it uses Altmetric data in it as well. And this URL, app.dimensions.ai, this gives you a mix of citation information, Altmetric information, that you can use for, again, digging through everything that's happening in your subject area and linking out to different platforms. And again, getting engaged with social media yourself, a whole different webinar. But just a quick nod to Kudos, which is a very effective platform for helping to direct social media activity, helping you to write short posts or longer press release style posts, giving you some sort of benchmarks, showing you the effectiveness of the activity that you have. So when you post something to social media platforms, the how many different views and things that it has. So it's a kind of a convenient one-stop platform for measuring your kind of metrics and activity. It also does include citations on Web of Science, or metric scores, and reads on the article. So it's very effective and very helpful. Relatedly, peer review metrics. I just want to give a sort of last shout out to trying to encourage academia as a whole to give more value and prestige to peer review activities. That was one of the goals of Publons when it was founded and set up. Publons is now inside the Web of Science researcher profiles. So if you make an account in Web of Science, that's where your Publons now is, and it records all of your reviews alongside your publication activity and citations in this metrics panel here. So hopefully incorporating that into this kind of competitive but mainstream database will help to increase the prestige of peer review activities and make them more valuable and make them more integral to researcher assessment and using them in our activities. And lastly, some issues to consider about the use of citations and metrics based on that kind of concept of different aspects of assessment. We all are very aware that our careers are dictated by, or often dictated by, the journals that we publish in, how many citations we receive, or how many citations the journal receives that we have to publish our articles in, and how really ethical that is as an assessment measure. So nearly 10 years ago now, actually more than 10 years ago, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment was established to raise the awareness of the misuse of metrics, to reduce reliance on using metrics to assess individuals' performance. So that's increasingly popular. Even Clarivate have been trying to tone down the emphasis on just the impact factor, as I hope looking through all of those pages demonstrated how many different kind of perspectives on the citation activity that they are presenting alongside the impact factor. So some final issues to consider in that: positive and negative citations are counted the same. So but these are all kind of points of debate, really, or what the impact of these mean. Different research types, different article types have different research profiles. A review journal will likely have a higher number of citations, a higher impact factor than a research journal on the same topic. Only work that is indexed in these databases is counted. So citations, so it can be quite tricky, for example, in the Web of Science, to find all the citations to all the articles that you're interested in because they're in non-indexed journals. The impact factor is used as an assessment tool for people, despite being the measure of an entire journal. So that's what we were talking about with that DORA statement there. They can contribute to, if we're not careful, misusing metrics can contribute to toxic work and career environments, which is becoming a point of a lot of kind of focus over the last few years. And it can creates an unhealthy focus on data related to articles rather than the human impacts, which is what the altmetrics that we were just looking at are aimed to address, provide us with the human element of how research is being used in the contexts that it's being used outside of the kind of academic metric environment. So to recap the session before we finish, We looked at authors, being able to find influential researchers in your subject area, how to see the institutions that are active in your field. Both of those can help set up collaborations and networking. Global positions of research, by looking at the regional aspects. We can dig into topics and understand which research areas are developing, where niches are, help us focus our own work or think of new ideas. We can see the competition, other people that are working in our own areas, competition or potential collaboration, really, I should put there. And funding. I actually didn't show you the funding part of the Web of Science, but as we were going through those panels, there is a section on the funding bodies. So when you're digging in through all these individual articles into all these subtopics, you can see which organizations are funding the research in those areas. So that will help you find who you can apply for grants and money for your work for. So on that note, I would like to ask whether anyone has any questions on that session, or on any of the issues, ideas that I raised. We have a feedback form that we would like you to fill in for us, to give us your thoughts on this session, help us inform future sessions of this kind, set up new ones in the future. Your feedback would be most appreciated if you could fill in that form. I think Neha is sharing it now, pinned at the top of the chat. So if you could click on that and fill that in, it'd be greatly appreciated. And I'm happy to take any or all of your questions that you have. I hope that inspired some questions, piqued some curiosity among you. Okay, fantastic. Is self-citation of great consideration? Is it encouraged? Well, this is true of any citation. All citations that you use in a paper should be directly relevant to the article themselves. So if you are citing yourself for a valid reason, then that citation is valid. If you're building on your previous work, if you have published a preliminary study or an exploratory study to understand how to base the research, then of course when you come to do the full project, or a full systematic review, for example, on those on that topic, then the self-citation is perfectly warranted. If you've established a method in a previous paper, then the citation is valid again. Where self-citations are not valid is when they contribute really nothing to the article and you're just trying to bump up your citation profile. Web of Science and Scopus do show separate metrics with and without self-citations to the journal included. And on a journal level, they regularly review journals for the amount of self-citation within the journal, and they'll kick journals out if they have too many self-citations. Similarly for individuals, if people are found to be citing themselves quite a lot, then there are blogs like Retraction Watch that will probably notice, and you might find articles written about unethical researchers citing themselves too often. Maybe that's inspired some other questions. I think I'm not actually sure when the session is due to end. How many more minutes we have left, but feel free to keep asking any questions. Um, I'm just scrolling up through the chat to see if anyone has more questions. Um, okay. Which journals possess high impact factor from my experience? Well, you can access the Web of Science master list and look at the journals yourself. I mean, that's a tricky question because what it depends on the subject areas that you want to look at, um, and how many journals are indexed in each category. And because they're given metrics, some will have, they're immediately ranked by virtue of being given metrics each. And so the top journals will have the highest impact factors depending on whatever field that is. I was saying review journals often have higher impact factors because reviews tend to be cited a lot more than primary research, but see, not always the case. Any journals publishing a lot of COVID research at the moment will have higher impact factors. Okay, so a new question. In the country where I work, there are those postgrad research tutors who require their students to cite their work. Is there a combination of metrics that I've been discussing which can help counter such academic dishonesty and opportunism? In a way, yes, yes, there is, but how to identify it, how to kind of flag that activity without actually looking for it in the first place is perhaps the harder issue. What we can use these databases for is for, say, searching for an institution and looking at the citations there, seeing who is the most highly cited from that institution, and then seeing which papers have been citing that person and seeing where those citations are based. So it's very easy to find the citation profile of someone and get a sense of whether those citations are genuine, and that does happen when if a journal editor will notice a paper being accepted or a paper in review, and they'll notice a lot of the same name in the article, then they might do some investigating, and then citation networks can be uncovered that way. Maybe you have heard of the term, the citation ring. That happens. That's quite common. Well, not necessarily common, but it is one of the reasonably well-known forms of ethical misconduct that happen enough that a lot of journal editors are aware for it, and it's one of the things you'll have in your back of the mind when you're looking through articles, looking at the references, and you will know many references to the same people will raise that red flag. Let's see. If the H index is high according to citations of the papers, but in different disciplines, does it take into consideration? No, the H index is just purely the number of papers published and the number of citations. There are no. I mean, you probably could break it down, but because it's by an individual person, it's really intended to be a person level metric. Although you can report them for journals, and people do report them for journals, the number of articles published and the number of citations, but it doesn't really work for journals. because journals might publish hundreds of articles, and I wouldn't expect very many journals to be receiving hundreds of citations per article. So it doesn't work. It only really works on a person basis. And you could divide up your articles by field if you want to dig into your own H-index and recalculate it. Hope that helps answer that question. That's more of a speculative answer than a definitive one. Okay, we've time for one last question. What's a good one that's slightly different to ones that we've had before? Open access. Okay, can you refer more to the impact of open access to the number of citations? Yes, we can. I mean, this is another aspect of journal publishing, article citation activity that is of interest to the people that are researching that type of thing, type of bibliometrics, whether there is an effect of open access on citations. Or sorry, I can stop sharing my screen. Sorry. There is, say, an inconsistent, inconclusive research on whether open access articles are more likely to receive citations than not. What is definitely clear is that open access articles receive many more views than closed articles. Even in the same journals, the open access articles are read many more times than the closed ones. So by virtue of that, you would hope and expect the ones that are read by more people to be able to be cited by more people, because the full article can be read. Whether that actually happens or not is what has some inconclusive evidence behind it. A lot of investigation shows that there is a big effect. Open access has more citations, and other studies don't. It might be worth digging into each of those studies and understanding whether there are any sort of biases in the framing of those, whether they were trying to be steered in one direction or another. But yeah, hopefully that sort of answers that. I mean, I think the fact that one last question has just popped up, but I'll incorporate that into this answer. I think the fact that more people are able to read an article as open access is more important than if it is cited at all, really, because not all of the impacts and effects and influence and value in an article are measured in citations, but you will always maximize the potential from a paper by it being open access. I think that's kind of unarguable, but I reckon some people might be able to argue back, but for me it's not. Hopefully that sort of answers that last question. And that brings the session to a close. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. The feedback form is, I think, still pinned at the top of the chat. If you could complete that and fill that in for us, that would be fantastic. We would greatly appreciate it. And just to say, yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I've been Duncan Nicholas, your presenter for the session today. Thank you, Editage, everyone behind the scenes, for helping me through that session, sorting out the questions and the chat, and inviting me to speak for you today. Thank you very much.